these sons were Simon's partners, and they were amazed too. Jesus said to Simon, "Don't be afraid. From now on, you will be fishing for people." As soon as they brought the boats to Jesus, he fell on his face and begged, "Lord, if you want, you can make me clean." Jesus reached out his hand, touched him, and said, "I do want to be clean." Instantly, the skin disease left him. Jesus ordered him not to tell anyone. Instead, Jesus said, "Go and show yourself to the priest and make an offering for your cleansing as Moses instructed. This will be a testimony to them." News of him spread even more, and huge crowds gathered to listen and to be healed from their illnesses. But Jesus would withdraw to deserted places for prayer.
Barrier. I'm going to walk around. Get my steps in. Yeah, I'm all right with that. You love me. I looked really close to the window. The amount of times my wife has a stroke based on the things I say and do is very entertaining. Whenever we get our comedy show called The Sailors, please know that you all have been workshopped for this for a long, long time. After worship today, we'll be having our fall council meeting. Please consider staying for that as well, too. It is something in the life of the church during fall and spring in which reports are given, but also it is a way of decisions being made for the life of the church. Yes, you have nominated people to do the day-to-day business work that is done through the board and executive, but part of being transparent, part of being a community, is having moments like council to share with you and to also answer any questions as best we can. Please consider this an invitation to come and be part of that. One of the things that occurs during council meetings is there's a pastor's report. Now, for executive and for board meetings, I generate a report of things I've done since the previous meeting. So when it comes to things like fall council, I tend to lean towards doing a bit of exploration, some kind of what theological things, stirrings are going on within me. And so that's what I want to do for you today, because I specifically want to take time and talk about what I wrote in our newsletter, things that I had spoken of a little bit last week as well too, with the Disability Enhanced Ministry. And I want to talk about that. Good morning. If you had fallen asleep, you aren't now. Can't wait to hear how that sounded on the video later on. So today, in talking about the Disability Enhanced Ministry a little bit more, I want to share with you 4 stories. 4 stories in particular that help me understand where we are today. When I was 11 years old, a small screaming child was born. Her name was Kara, and she was now my sister. And one thing was quite certain. She looked very different. Why? Because Kara, as you know, has albinism. She has no pigment. What that means is she has shockingly white hair. Birth. She will have that throughout the rest of her life. She has no pigment in her skin, which means we have to be keenly aware of the sun, we found out. Why? Because holy Hannah only takes about 2 minutes to crisp up when you have no pigment. We also learned that because she has no pigment, she's considered legally blind. What's that got to do with it? The color of your eyes helps your eyes focus. Since she has no pigment, her eyes look pink because they're just showing the blood vessels. They're showing the back of her eye. As such, her eyes can't focus. without assistance. And so she is legally blind. This is part of what it means to have albinism. Now, what we learned at that point was, man, there's a lot of things we don't know. I can remember being an 11-year-old sitting in meetings with my parents, with service providers. Why? Because none of my family had any idea what was going on. We didn't know. We've heard of albino deer, but we thought that was a deer thing. Well, it turns out it's a human thing. It's a genetic thing. And so what ended up happening was there were services that were provided for us, not only to assist Kara, but to also assist the family in being able to be supportive for her. One of her providers one day brought in a bag of goodies. Now, I happened to be there at the time, and so as any curious 11, 12-year-old, I saw these bag of goodies. I'm like, what's in the bag? Turns out they were all these instruments to try and help the family understand what Kara saw. So, we were told the best vision Kara could expect at the time was 2200. Okay, normal vision is 20/20. So they said the best she can expect is 2200. So here, put these goggles on. This is what 2200 looks like. And I remember putting them on going, I can't see anything. Wow, I couldn't even see as far as where that camera is right there. From here to there, couldn't see it. They said it is likely Kara will have 2400 visions, what they thought she had at the time. So here, put these on. That was even worse. I had to put my hand right here till I could see it clearly. Fast forward from that time to 23 years. I'm a pastor in my first church. And there's a gentleman who, if he wasn't literally born in the church, he was there the day after. He had been there forever. Well, one Sunday, he's not there. Okay, that happens. Everybody takes vacations. Everybody gets sick on a Sunday. That's fine. The next Sunday, he's not there. Oh, boy. What did I do? Because all I can think is, yes, seminary taught me a lot of things. Seminary doesn't always teach you how to handle conflict when people stop coming because of something you've done or said. And so I'm like, oh, I've made him mad. What have I done? So I call him, set up a time to go visit. I go and I visit, and I stay with him in his apartment. He was living in a community, a brother community like we have at BRC, where it's an apartment along with other apartments. So he lives by himself, but he's with others, that kind of living. And if he falls or has an accident, there's a button you can push, pull, rip, whatever. And so after the initial niceties and talking about the fact that Penn State had won the week before, I know I'm not used to that now because they are doing such a glorious job of losing. There, I put that out there. We've acknowledged it. We're moving from it. It's the only time I'm going to root for Ohio State when they play Michigan. Anyways, I digress. And in talking to him, I said, hey, man, I noticed you hadn't been there the past couple weeks. Is everything okay? He took a deep breath. Now, I will tell you, when you're new to your job, and your job is where you live, your job is everything you are, and somebody goes, well, you're like, oh, no. It feels like a modern day getting called to the principal's office. Now, I don't know how many of you got called to the principal's office growing up, but I did. And yeah, Doug, I know you did. You probably still do. You don't even go to a school when you get called to the principal's office. I many times have been called. And so I'm like, well, here we go. And he goes, Lee, I'll tell you. He said, I'm getting older. Okay. He says, as I've gotten older, my body isn't what it used to be. Frequently, I have to go to the bathroom rather urgently. And I can't always make it to the bathroom in time. See, the church where we worshiped at the time, the way it was structured was kind of like a tri-level. It was built up because that's the time it was built. And you'd walk into the front door, you'd walk up 7 stairs, and you're at the sanctuary. To get to the basement, you'd have to go through a Sunday school room and then go down 7 more stairs to be in the basement, which is where the bathrooms were as well, too. And also, I want to point out that getting down the steps was a bit of a feat because the steps, the hallway, and I'm only being slightly dramatic when I say it was only as wide as this. I'm only being slightly dramatic there. So if you have wider shoulders or these childbearing hips, sometimes you got to be careful how you're walking down. Imagine then you're in your 90s and you have to suddenly go to the bathroom and you have to stand up and try to shuffle back and make it down these narrow stairs to make it to the bathroom in time. And he said, I can't guarantee I can do that anymore. So I guess I can't come. And I can remember leaving that moment thinking, what kind of community are we when we say, come and worship with us so long as you can make it to the bathroom in time? A couple of years ago, my dad looks at my stepmother and says, I think I need to call the doctor. Why is that, Carl? Can't feel my foot. How long has that been going on? Well, about 5 weeks. What? What now? Yeah, I can't feel my foot. Yeah, nerve damage, nerve death, all that good jazz, to the point where gangrene was starting to set in on my dad's leg. Way to be on top of that, Carl. It got to the point, it became apparent very quickly that my dad was going to have to lose his leg. Sure enough, off at the knee. Surgery went well. My dad's big question is, what do they do with the leg? I'm like, why do you want to know that? Well, just do. And then I know that my weird questions of life are quite genetic, and I have no choice. This is what I'm going to be in my life. I went with my dad then a couple times to visit with him at the recovery hospital, the physical therapy hospital, Health South. There, my dad had to learn how to walk again. Something he had been doing since he was 15 months old. He had to learn to walk again. Some of the comments that he made to me that day, those times have forever stuck with me. One of them was, you never realize how much walking is a full body experience till you have to learn how to walk again. And he's right. You know, if you don't walk like for a while, your core gets weak. You stop doing it. You don't use it anymore. You lose the ability to balance. And then he made this comment to me. You never know how much you need a handicapped bathroom until you need a handicapped bathroom. A few months ago, I was having a conversation with a woman whose child had been involved in an accident many years before. And as such, this child was going to have disabilities now for the rest of their lives. This woman was talking about it was a tragedy. You couldn't prepare for that. Nobody expects that to happen. And so they were left in alerts trying to figure out what to do. And they said, we had a really good faith community, and they supported us as best they could. They changed some things in the sanctuary. They tried, but it just wasn't enough. And we felt bad asking for more help. Because the needs of this particular child of theirs was such that even getting them to the bathroom was a big deal. Because the child had a lot of equipment that came with them. They said, I know our community loves us, but I felt bad asking for more. So we just stopped going. What do all 4 of these stories have in common? They have a story. Their stories are experiences of disability or limitations of life and the responses of the people around them and how they were able to learn. These stories have helped me gain a new understanding from our passage this morning as well, too. Whilst in the newsletter, I wrote about Jesus healing the man who was paralyzed as his friends caused what I deem friendly vandalism. That's where they tore open the person's roof and lowered a person down. I'm very entertained by that story for a number of reasons, but that's a different sermon for a different time. This story about Jesus healing the leper, the one with the skin disease, struck me. Now, I want to point out one more thing before I get into the meat of this. I am a firm believer in what's called the continuous revelation of God. And that is to say that what I know now is not what I will know forever. That there are things in life that God will open up to me. There are aspects of faith that will be opened up to me based on any number of experiences that I will understand differently. An example of that for me was the Martha and Mary story, in which it had often been preached to me that the issue was that Martha was too busy and Mary was worshiping. Somebody pointed out to me maybe the issue was that Martha was trying to force Mary to be like her. This continuous revelation, this ability to hear different parts of Scripture in different ways is why it's still so vital. Because you can hear something one way that you wouldn't have thought of before. Life has a way of doing that. Sometimes I call that serendipity. Let me give you an example. That last story I told about the mother with her child who had the accident and was going to have equipment for the rest of their lives. Around the same time I have that conversation with that mother, there's a lot of news reports coming out talking about, with COVID, one of the things you've got to be really, really careful with, aside from communicating or talking, is isolation. They really started telling people, reach out to those. If you need somebody, reach out. If you haven't heard from somebody, reach out. Isolation became a very big push. In fact, in extremes, isolation is considered a form of torture and banned in most countries. So in my head, around the time I'm having the conversation with this mother, are these worries, these cautions about isolation. And I had this conversation with this mother who shares with me the fact that even though there's people who tried, she's still isolated. And so I got to wondering, before COVID, who were the isolated? There's a whole list of people you could pick from. There's a whole wealth of people you could pick from who are actually quite isolated. Widows tend to be isolated more than most. When you've lost a loved one, people often don't know how to interact with you. And so they often back away. If somebody has a criminal record, they're often isolated. If somebody has an addiction issue, maybe they're in recovery, maybe they're not yet, you tend to be isolated. If you have a mental health issue, you're isolated. The irony is you factor all these together and it looks like that the overwhelming majority of people are actually isolated. Again, this isolation, this way of being alone is very much a problem for, yes, Jesus would take time alone. He would step away, but he always re-engaged. He always came back. And God in creation, Genesis 2, tells us it is not good for humanity to be alone. Community is what is supposed to be God's people. And if there are those who are isolated, God's people are supposed to reach out. Not just say, come be with us, but to actively engage and say, we want you to be with us. Now, I think it's interesting that this story of Jesus healing the leper immediately follows the calling of 3 disciples. Peter, James, and John are fishermen. They had been fishing all day and had failed. they go to my school of fishing. I'm really good at catching everything but fish. If you need a pond of water to be cleared out of all random things in there, I'm your guy. Doesn't matter where I cast. Thomas could cast right beside me. The fish will jump out at him. I cast. Here's a skull. What is a skull doing in there? I don't know, some animal drowned. That's what I catch. They couldn't catch anything, and Jesus yells out, do the other side. Remember, fishermen do this for a living. They know what works and what doesn't. Hauling in nets is not an easy thing. And I will give those three credit. They did it. I don't know if I'd have been as kind. Other side, yeah, sure, whatever. And of course, that's where we get the abundance. We see the abundance of what can happen when we follow Jesus' commands. There can be abundance. And it can be really tempting to say that if we just do God's commands, we're going to be abounding, overflowing with things, with fish, with money, with life. But that's not entirely true. That's called the prosperity gospel, and I think it's a problem. And it's interesting that right after this big thing about catching these fish, this miracle of abundance, with the healing of a leper. Why does that matter? Because frankly, nobody talked with a leper. Nobody interacted with them. Why? Because it's a skin disease that was highly contagious. It wasn't clear what would happen. And all you saw was that your skin would fall off. Yep. That's kind of a hard person to have around the Thanksgiving table. And so what ended up happening is you'd have leper colonies. Why? Because who else could be with them? Leprosy is also not just a physical issue in the Jewish faith, it is a spiritual issue. Any kind of disability, any kind of ailment is considered punishment from God. And punishment from God comes about because you're unclean. There's this great story in Scripture where somebody asked Jesus, this man's been crippled from birth. Why? Was it something his parents did or something he did? That question reflects this Jewish thought at the time that punishment came about because you did something wrong. Now, if you are unclean, if you're considered ritually unclean in the Jewish faith, couple things are in your life are impacted. One, you can't interact with the community anymore until you are purified, until you are clean. Second, you can't go into worship at the temple, which is believed where God lived. So until you were clean, you couldn't get close to God. That was the idea. But here's the other little trick that's interesting. If you were unclean, anybody who interacted with you was unclean then as well. So you became more isolated. This disability, this ailment isolated you further because people were too afraid of how it would impact their lives as well too. So imagine then you have the story of abundance, of overflowing fish, money. That's what that meant, money. Jesus then turns and says, but look what else I'm going to do. I'm going to go to the people that you don't want to talk to. I'm going to go to the people who are isolated. I'm going to interact with the people who are isolated. And I'm going to do everything I can to heal them, to help them, and support them. And this healing sets the tone, the reality for what Jesus wants his followers to do, I believe. They are being called to change